My name is John Jackson, and you're probably saying, who the hell is that? And why are we listening to him? Well, I've been coming to Elvis Week for a lot of years. I used to do a lot of the presentations with the Sony folks. That's me giving Mac Davis a plaque and Mark James. I was in the movie The Searcher on HBO, if you guys saw that, and that's us at the premiere in this very room back in 2018. And then most recently, I was in the Netflix special called Return of the King. So that's who I am. I'm a huge Elvis fan. My first Elvis Week was 1997. So, you know, I couldn't be more thrilled to be here. I'm currently auditioning to be a Tom Brown tribute artist. So please be nice. Is Tom here? Okay, don't make fun. Okay, so today we have a very special program for you, and I hope that this all goes according to plan, because we've got not only amazing panel for you, and we're going to talk about the time in the summer of 1970. Okay, put yourself in the summer of 1970, and we've got really one of the only times that Elvis was working with two different bands at the same time, because he had started the Vegas residency and was doing basically what we now know as the TCB band, James and Ronnie and Glenn D and everybody. But he also was, scheduled to record music in the studio to put records out for RCA and everything. So who does he call but only the very greatest musicians in Nashville to come and do some music. So I want to introduce to you first our band who will be playing for us. And I want to get this right, so I am going to read some stuff to you. It's led by a gentleman named Brad Birkadal. Of course. He was a featured Beale Street performer for years. He moved here from Tacoma, Washington in 1998. Founding member of the group The Dempseys, who I love. They performed locally until they broke up in about 2010, but they do have a music note on the Beale Street Walk of Fame. He continues to perform with this great band. He put a solo record out called Moving On in 2014. He has played with people like Carl Perkins, James Burton, DJ Fontana, Billy Burnett, Wanda Jackson, TCB Band. He's traveled all over the world playing Elvis music. And most impressively to me, he was featured in the 2005 movie Walk the Line as Scotty Moore. And he played with Carrie in 1970. That he turns over and he says, I need some new material. This needs to be a little bit more of a forward thing, a little bit more grown up. So in June of 1970, he calls these gentlemen right here. And they do sessions at RCA Victor. In 5 days, they record over 40 songs, known as the Nashville Marathon. So I want to bring out to you today two of the gentlemen who were there. On bass, Mr. Norbert Putnam. And then on harmonica, organ, and everything else, Mr. Charlie McCoy. How are you?
Excuse me one second.
I'm good. Y'all come out here today. Good to see y'all.
Okay, who said wake up, Putt? Who said that? Do you know he said that to me at like 4 a.m. in the morning? And I played sessions starting the day before at 10 in the morning. You did too, probably, Charlie. 2 to 5, right? Remember that? And then we'd come over there to RCA, and he didn't show up until late in the evening. And then he was a great storyteller. And it'd take 2 hours for him to get us all calmed down. And at 10 o'clock, we would go from 10 to 5. And So when he did that Christmas song, it's okay to say this real quickly about the Christmas song?
You can say whatever you want.
They sing well, the only reason any of you know who I am is because in the middle he did Merry Christmas, baby. And the bass part was dog, 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 get on. And I want to go home. Go. And we do it all the way through, Charlie. Remember that? So he does it all the way through. And I think, oh, God, I'll be in the car in 20 minutes. And then he says, play it, James. Well, James has already played it once. And he starts over. We never stopped, did we? You know? And so I'm sort of leaning back like this, and I'm not even attempting to play a clever bass part, you know. And just before James takes it, he looks over at me and he goes, "Wake up, Putt!" And he puts the gun at me like that. And thank God he did, because you guys would never know who I am.
And now we do. So, if I could implore both of you just quickly, how did you get here? Where did you? When did you start, and when did you first meet Elvis?
I started doing studio work in Nashville in 1961. 20 years old. My first session was with 20-year-old Anne Margaret. Whoa, what a way to start. Anyway, at the end of that session, the bass player walked over to me. "You free Friday?" I was free the rest of my life. And he booked me on a Roy Orbison record called Candyman. When that record hit the radio, my phone started ringing. 64 years later, it's still ringing, y'all.
And so when did you first meet Elvis?
About 1965, they had scheduled soundtracks for the movie Harem Scarum. The movie company called Scotty Moore and said, "We've got to move the soundtracks to a different date. Change the band over." Well, he said, "They may already be busy." And they said, "But this is Elvis." And Scotty said, "But this is Nashville. You don't cancel on one artist to play with another. You don't do that here." He said, "Don't worry about it. I'll get you a good band." So he hired 5 of us guys to work with Elvis the first time ever. And we were concerned, how's he going to take this with these strangers here working with him? He walked in the door, walked up to each one of us, shook our hand and said, "Thank you for helping me." And from that moment on, yes, it was a great, great experience. And I worked 7 movie soundtracks, 3 other regular albums, and the marathon session. So I saw him a lot, and he was always the same nice guy.
And Norbert, so you came to Nashville a little bit later, right, from Muscle Shoals.
Well, see, I came up in 65, I think it was. Yeah. But I didn't play with Elvis right away because he had a great band, Bobby Moore and all those guys. But then he went down to Memphis and did the Memphis Boys, and he liked the way they played. And Felton Jarvis told the story. He said, "Find me some guys who play like the Memphis Boys." And he says, "Well, I can get you the Muscle Shoals rhythm section." And that's how me and Kerrigan and Briggs came into the scene, And I think he liked it. Over the next 7 years until he died, I think I played on 122 of those songs. So there's a couple of times I thought he should have fired me, but he didn't. But he was a sweet guy, I gotta tell you. He was lovely. And the best storyteller you've ever heard.
And you were brought out to Las Vegas in February of '70 to meet him and have a conversation, right?
Well,
See the band.
Felton invited us out, because they were going to do a lot of the songs that we'd already recorded. And the funny thing, Charlie, I saw some of the tapes of that. They had more time to rehearse than we did. We would do these songs in 15, 20 minutes tops, okay? And they were out there playing for an hour. I thought, boy, if we could have had that, it would have been great, wouldn't it? But But when the record came out, it was half their versions of what we had done live.
Yeah, and that's what we want to get at here is, you know, there was this mixture going back and forth between what the TCB band guys were bringing to the music and what you guys brought to the music, and the blend of it makes the That's the Way It Is album, which is my favorite Elvis album. And you know, I think that you guys, the thing that strikes me about the material that you guys were doing, or that it was brought in for, it was just how mature it was. And the first song you guys did was 20 Days and 20 Nights, which if you think about it is, you know, a song about people getting divorced and families breaking down and stuff like that. Things you would never think Elvis would sing about, you know, in the 60s and in the 50s certainly. So, you know, do you remember the first night, the first sort of what happened that night?
I don't remember the first song particularly because what had happened, he came at 8 o'clock and kept us entertained for 2 hours with funny stories you ever heard about people trying to climb over the fence and steal his underwear and stuff. You know? And by the time it was 10 o'clock and we'd been there since 6, and Felton Jarvis came out and said, "No, Felton, we're gonna have to do something because the boys have made one session with an hour overtime. I haven't played a note. I like that, okay?" And so Elvis looked at me and he says, "Well, Felton, what are we doing?" And Felton said, "Well, you wanted to do a second Christmas album, a second gospel album, and you wanted to do an album of country standards," which, by the way, was a great record, didn't you think?
Very much Elvis country, yeah.
And then he said, "I've got 7 pop tunes." Well, that was 37 sides. I think we got 36, didn't we, Charlie? 35 or 36?
Yeah, I must say that, you know, by that time I had worked with him an awful lot. I must say he was freer, he was happier. He was doing all songs he wanted to do. You know, he wasn't controlled by a movie soundtrack or any of that stuff. And he had so much fun there. And but some of the nights would go on pretty late. I think one morning I got out in time for breakfast and to go to my morning session. But we were young then.
You don't have to rest when you're young, you know. I think I remember that. He's great, isn't he?
Oh. So Norbert, or both of you guys, tell me about this room. What's happening in this room right now when Elvis first comes in and you guys have been waiting for 4 hours? What happens?
Well, the piano's in the right place, but it was turned around with the keys back to the wall, and the drums were like next to that. And then the bass was right over there where those microphone plugs are, okay? And right in front was Chip Young and James Burton.
And that window was not there.
Oh, it wasn't, yeah.
And the drums were up against that wall where the window is now.
Yeah.
Over here on the side. And I was sitting in a chair up close to that door. I was playing acoustic guitar. And next to me was the great Grady Martin playing electric guitar. And we were both on that side of the room. I think there were only, I don't know, it was a small band.
Oh yeah.
No, I've got the wrong session.
Too many sessions.
Chip Young and James Burton.
And James Burton and
Right.
you. And by the way, can I just say something about Charlie? Everybody says he's a great musician. Yes. Not true. He's the best musician I ever met. Okay? That's serious. I was on a panel with him one time, and they asked me about Charlie. I said Charlie was the most dangerous musician in Nashville. Because if I'm setting up my bass and he comes through the door, my first thought is, if I don't play a nice part, he can play a better one. But he could do that on all the keyboards and all the guitars. He even played the trumpet, didn't you?
Yeah, I played trumpet on Everybody Must Get Stoned by Bob Dylan.
Did you get
some of the
stoned?
band's favorite record, I believe.
Yeah.
But anyway, Charlie's the best, all right?
But didn't he, so the first night he comes in and just plops himself down on the floor, right?
Oh, but yeah, in the middle of that, now all the chairs were around the parameters, but he's got some great stories I want to tell you. And he just plopped himself, and those tiles were not that clean. And we all sat down and made a little circle, and the king started telling us funny Elvis stories, okay? And by two hours go by, it's 10 o'clock, and this is the first time I played with him. I have to say, in the bathroom before I went out there, I said, "Dear God, don't let me be the first bass player to screw up an Elvis session." Okay? And so I was a little worried about playing, but after hearing him talk for like 2 hours, I grew up in Florence, Alabama, that's 70 miles from Tupelo. It was just like all the kids at my school. It was about cars and girls and cheeseburgers. That was, you know, so it was great. You know, he was just wonderful.
And so did he talk about sort of where he was at musically and where he wanted to go? And was he excited that he was doing this live thing again? And then
He never mentioned anything.
I think he
about
was
it.
excited. I mean, you know, because I was with him on some of the movies, and well, some of the movie songs were not that great.
It's pretty bad.
In fact, when we were doing Harem Scarum, one night he looked over at all of us and said, "Hey guys, I know some of these songs aren't so great, but let's do them as good as we can." You know, he was a total professional though. It was his job and he knew it, and he went in there and did it.
But you ask about him talking to the band, I think we did 3 or 4 songs that night, and I was standing beside him, and he hadn't said anything to any of us about anything. I mean, never said, "Could James just change that guitar part, or David, you do this," you know? And so I said, "Hey Elvis," I said, "are the bass parts okay?" And he says, "Oh, Put, the bass parts are great." He hadn't said anything, okay? Well, I played on 122 songs. He never changed a note. But one night, I hit a bad note. Well, it wasn't bad. Charlie, you know how we'd write it out, the verse. We could write music shorthand, so we'd have to memorize it. And we'd have a first ending to go back to do a second verse, same chords. Then we'd have a second ending that goes to the chorus. And you'd be playing along half asleep, and you go, "Was that the first ending or the second ending?" And one night I thought, "No, it's the second ending." And I went flying up to the 5 chord, and he stays on the 1 chord, so I play, boom, and I'll jump back on the 1. And I said, "Elvis, I gotta fix that." He goes, "Oh, but it's okay. Let's do another song." Well, every time I've heard that song, it makes my hairs on the back of my neck stand up, you know. I wish he'd been a little tougher on us, don't you?
That's the only trouble with about what we do. If we do something we don't like, it's around forever. You know what I mean? It'll come back to haunt you.
well, and that leads into, you know, playing with the live band. How much of what you guys were doing did he expect, you know, Jerry Chef? Did he expect, you know, Glenn D to sort of copy versus doing their own thing?
Well, he was so excited we got so many songs done. He actually mentioned us coming out and playing with, becoming his new rhythm section. And was it you, Charlie, said, "Well, if you pay us what we make here, we come," or something? And I think he offered $350. Colonel Tom offered $350 a week or something.
Yeah, and of course, James was in playing concerts with him, you know, James Burton, who, by the way, was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame last year.
Yeah.
And so James was there, and we had Chip Young and you and David and Jerry, right?
Yeah. But Colonel Tom was kind of cheap, I think, you know, because we were making $2,000 a week easily in those days, you know, and he offered like $350 a week. You know?
And you got to go home at night.
Oh yeah, I got to go home at 5 a.m. and sleep in my bed until 8. Yeah. But when you're young, you don't need to sleep, do you? You know?
I mean, there was at that time there was a sharp divide between the guys who would do the studio every day, 3 sessions, 4 sessions, whatever, and the guys who would go out on the road, right?
Oh yeah, well, if you came to town, a new guy would come to town, and he's a hot guitar player, and he's on a session, and he keeps wanting to do it again and again. I didn't get my part right. You never see him again in the studios. Word of mouth, he's on the road with somebody, you know, for the rest of his life, basically. It was a tough act to come into the studios with him. So I was scared to death when I came up there.
And I tell y'all folks, by that time that The musician pool had gotten so deep in Nashville. It was possible to do 3 recording sessions in one day and never see the same guy twice.
Yeah, that's
I mean, it was really that,
Yeah,
there was so much diversity going on.
yeah.
But you guys, by this time, had really worked yourselves into a unique situation, because the guys from out of town, Neil Young, you know, all the George Harrison, all these people, they wanted to work with you guys, and not, you know, and this is how the whole idea of Nashville Cats came up, you know.
Well, I have to tell you though, now Briggs and Kerrigan and I were the 3 guys from Muscle Shoals.
Mm-hmm.
But after we'd been there for about a year, I would go to play for Chet, and I'm only one of the 3 that's there. Or I would fill in for Bobby Moore on Owen Bradley's stuff. And if I played 3 sessions in a day, I played with 3 different drummers, 3 different keyboard guys. They still had the great Floyd Kramer was there, and Pig Robbins, you know, and David. And so when we did Tony Joe White's Polk Salad Annie, it was one of the few times that the 3 of us guys in Muscle Shoals was hired for that reason, you know. And but day to day, I could go a whole week and not see Kerrigan or Briggs, you know. Because Charlie, wasn't it true? Like I remember Owen had a list of his players. He'd say book a session. He had 5 bass players that he trusted, 5 drummers. You know, he had 5 keyboard guys, and he probably had the Anita Kerrs and Jordan Ayers, and then about 100 guitar players that could do anything, you know. And that's what it was like. And so,
Yeah, if you can't get guitar player number 1 in Nashville, number 30 will blow your hat in the creek.
yeah.
I promise you, folks, it's that deep now.
It was a frightening place to be, you know.
So I mean, like I said, some of these songs, these are my favorite Elvis recordings. Another one that you guys did was Just Pretend. And,
Yes.
you know, that's another one that's, you know, about separation. It's about, you know, being away from your loved ones. I'm trying to get at, you know, was he in a place, like a more mature place in his life? You know, he's married, he's a dad. Is there something that he was sort of going for in the themes of the music that you could tell? Maybe he didn't say it, but you could sort of tell that he was doing that?
I think he fell in love with the big band he had on stage in Vegas, because Las Vegas, all the showrooms had about a 40-piece orchestra. And Elvis is a rock and roll guy, and they're not firing these people for a week or a month. And so he's got the orchestra there, and he loved having the strings and the brass and the voices. And of course, a lot of the rock and rollers thought, why did he change? Well, he was 35 years old, okay? He wasn't a kid. He hated to do Hound Dog. You know, he'd only do a verse of it. And but he wanted to be able to do the ballads like Sinatra or Dean Martin, and he could, you know. And I think he got changed by the way the orchestras are set up in Las Vegas, and they were great. A lot of the great old players that would retire in LA would move there and play in the orchestra. So they had great guys, you know.
I don't want you guys to think that this was all ballads. You know, he wasn't just doing ballads here when we were in the studio in 1970. I mean, there was some good old rock and roll too. But the thing I want to ask about is there's this impression people have that he was somehow being controlled by his publishing company, or you know, the Colonel, or somebody telling him he needed to do certain material instead of other material. And I feel like these sessions and then the live stuff that he was doing kind of dispels that some, because I think it's, you know, songs that were obviously meaningful to him, but then obviously he was doing songs that he didn't have publishing on. You know, he didn't have publishing on You Don't Have to Say You Love Me. He didn't have publishing on, you know, a lot of these things.
The movies were a different thing, because the songs for the movies were written mainly by writers who wrote for Elvis Presley music. So they were being controlled. But this album, I think this is one of the reasons he was so free. It was songs he wanted to do. And yeah, go for it.
And I remember a couple of nights. Is this thing on? Hello, can you hear me? I remember a couple of nights. Now his publisher guys were there, like Lamar Fike, you know, and the guys from Hill and Range, and yeah, and what they would, and Elvis hadn't heard the new pop tunes, let's say, for instance, you know, and Freddie Beanstalk would come out and he'd say to Elvis, "This was written by that guy, you know, he wrote that song last year, it sold 30 million copies, and this is a great song." And he'd hand it to Elvis, and it would start to play, and Elvis would be looking at us, and he'd be looking around the room, and he'd go, "This is a piece of," and he'd tear it up, and he'd throw it, and Freddie would run out of the room. And out would come another one. You know, the next guy got, "Well, no, Elvis, don't get upset now." And Elvis was having so much fun doing this. He would go through 5 or 6 songs and winding up, throwing them at the guys, and then finally he'd say, "Let's do this one, guys." And it really wasn't much better than the rest of them. You know? But I'm just trying to make a point. He loved to have fun in the studio.
And I assume one song that was fun to do, because I know I can see him having fun when I watch him do it on stage, is Patch It Up. Do you remember doing that one?
I remember it being 5 a.m. and I was trying to play that bass part, and God, I gotta tell you, and when we were doing the big screen show, we were doing a thing for the fans somewhere. There was a small 100 people there, and it was going around, and they said, what was the worst song you hated to play? And Ron Tutt said, "I hated Patch It Up, Baby." I stood up and said, "But I had a great bass part on there. How can you say that?"
I think, okay, well, so there was horns, there was background singers. When did that kind of stuff get added to it? And did you guys have any notion of that at all?
I had no notion of it, because, you know, I was, at that time of my life, I was busy, and so what they did afterwards, you know, in the beginning, you couldn't do that stuff because in the early 60s, when you were recording a song, you're making the record. Everybody had to be right. If one guy messed up, everybody had to do it again, and nobody wanted to be that guy. They wouldn't say anything, but they'd give you these looks. But then technology allowed us, you know, to expand. Now the technology has gotten so sophisticated, it's killed the record business.
Well, I do remember that Felton Jarvis found himself with 36 or 37 songs, and Elvis wanted it to sound more like the Las Vegas band, so he starts hiring arrangers, and Briggs and I wrote a few charts every now and then, right? But Berg and White, about three guys did the bulk of the work. But I got a call. I wrote 2 or 3 charts, and David wrote 2 or 3. It was the first time my name was on an Elvis record. So I took it down to my mother, and I said, "Do you see this?" And she said, "My God, you really do know Elvis, don't you?" Because the union, I think, made the artists put the arrangers on the credits, but we never got any credits as players, you know. And so my mother made light of it. She says, "Oh, you do know Elvis, right?" Well, I got a phone call a week later from one of her neighbors. Said, "Did you know that Alice has taken that album all over the neighborhood and bragged about how her boy plays her Elvis?" So it served me well.
Now, another person that became really integral in his sound at this point was Charlie Hodge, and getting Charlie Hodge in the band, singing all the great background vocals and that real tight harmony on top of him. Was he in the studio for any of this?
I don't remember him being there. I think he was with us when we came down to Memphis. When we came to Stax, I think he was there. But we did have a bunch of guys from the Memphis Mafia there, you know. And
come on, tell it, spill it.
Well, no, they were all great guys, you know. As a matter of fact, Charles, you remember the night that Elvis did the karate demonstration, and he had Red West point a revolver at him?
Oh yeah. So Chip Young asked Elvis, he said, "If a guy came at you with a pistol, what would you do?" So he called for Red West to come in. And Red West came in and he had a pistol. And Chip said, "Is that pistol loaded?" He said, "Yeah." And he said, "I wouldn't carry an unloaded pistol." He said, well, for this, would you please unload it? So he did, he unloaded. He walks up to Elvis. Elvis makes his karate move. The pistol goes flying through the air and stuck in the back of Chip's acoustic guitar. And Elvis said, whoever's guitar that is, I'll buy him a new one. And Chip said, no way. I'm the only one in the world with a guitar with a hole made by Elvis.
I'd like to say something about the condition he was in 1970. He was sharp. He and Red would do karate demonstrations. One night, Elvis wanted to show how he could take 2 fingers and go to Red's eyes. And he comes like this and stops a 1/4 of an inch before he hit the pupil to his eye. And I thought, these guys are pretty good. You know?
And in the rehearsal footage that we see in July and out in Hollywood, where he's got the pink shirt on and they're in the studio and he's on the stool and everything, you can really see where Charlie starts to, you know, inform these songs and everything. One of my favorites that they keep rehearsing is How the Web Was Woven.
I played it at home. My mom sent me outside. I was 8 years old.
Well, we're glad that you kept playing because it's just so cool. It's just so cool to have him here. It is so special to hear. We're hearing the record live when these guys play. So yeah, thank you.
I don't think it's fair, you know. Well, he can carry something in his pocket to take over the session.
What an easy load in this guy's got.
I used to come in with an acoustic bass and a big amplifier.
Yeah.
You know, all
I
that
like to
stuff.
tell drummers the choices we make when we're young.
So I'm fascinated with this idea that he was preparing songs to play live. He already had some songs he was playing live that you guys didn't cut. And, you know, the idea that he was sort of developing repertoire for both things that only overlapped, you know, some. Here's some song, I'm just gonna name some songs that he was doing live or did live that you guys didn't do in the studio. So you didn't do I Just Can't Help Believin', which is of course, you know, one of the classics there, which was, and these were, sorry, I'm a historian, so dates matter. So I Just Can't Help Believin', you know, B.J. Thomas had that song out in June of 1970, and Elvis is doing it in August of 1970. So he was, and you know, Words by the Bee Gees, which came out in 1968. Sweet Caroline he does, you know, in the show, which came out in May of '69. And then, of course, Something by the Beatles, which comes out in September of '69. So there was a lot of very current, you know, material, and again, publishing be damned, that he was doing. But those songs that I just named, you guys didn't do in the studio. Was there discussion of, hey, I heard you're doing this one, let's cut that, or was it? Or was there any sort of, you know,
No,
let's get the set ready for the
We
show?
never had any idea what the next song would be, you know.
Us either.
But so when he would call out, you know, more contemporary songs or songs that, you know, people would know, like, we'll get to Bridge Over Troubled Water in a minute, but
You don't have to say you love me.
you don't have to say you love me.
I think
exactly.
they planned to do that.
You're right.
Because
So that was
Springfield
one.
had a great record on it, you know.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
that was one that you guys did in the studio and he did live. It was a crossover because I think he knew it was going to be a big
Yeah.
moment. So what do you remember about him bringing that one in? Because that was a very famous song.
Well, I knew that song better than most of the stuff, you know. And I think, Charlie, you played the organ on that, didn't you? Did you play that?
Yeah.
But Charlie and I played a line together. It featured a flatted fifth chord, but I think we were the only ones who knew that. You know, I did that boom boom. And that was a pretty big hit, wasn't it? That was a top 20.
Big
top
hit,
10.
yeah, for Dusty. And then,
But
you know,
Elvis
for
got
him
up
too,
there
yeah.
in the charts really good. You know, he loved to do a song to just show he could do it, you know. And well, later on we'll talk about that, you know.
Wow.
So when he would bring in a song that was a very known song, Bridge Over Troubled Water, again, we'll get to, but, you know, a song like You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, for instance, would you guys just know that already, or would you have to bring in a recording, or what was the process of, you know, hey, I want to do it like, it's like Dusty, but I want to do it more like this or whatever.
We were very familiar with it. Doesn't mean we knew every note and every chord.
Yeah, exactly.
We were very familiar.
So would someone bring in a record and you guys would hear it a few times? I know that was the process, right? You'd make up some charts and do that.
Yeah, or else someone would, but I don't think anybody was doing that on these sessions. A lot of times, one of the musicians, a session leader usually, brings in charts ahead of time. But that wasn't happening at these sessions.
Well, the thing was, usually one of the guys in the room knew all the changes. Seriously, you know. And then we'd start playing, and he'd say, no, this guy, oh, that's what it is. But we never spent more than 4 or 5 minutes before we had a chart, you know.
And we write charts as they're playing.
Yeah.
You know, we have a system in Nashville that everybody understands and everybody knows. And if the songs are not way difficult, we can usually write it down the first time through.
In fact, a lot of players won't actually read music, is that right? Like, they won't read music, they'll just read numbers.
Well, I think James Burton had a problem reading music, but
Yeah.
I remember Ray Stevens came down to Muscle Shoals and he handed me a bass part and I couldn't read it after a couple of years. And he took us to dinner that night. He said, now if you guys could get your sight reading together, you could come to Nashville and I'll hire you in all the sessions I arrange. And we said, well, I don't know, we got a great river here to fish in and ski. And then he said, do you know what those Nashville guys make in 3 hours? And it was, and you can do 3 or 4 a day if you can get to work. Well, we started studying our sight. I got a book on orchestrating and arranging, and I started looking at bass scales, you know. And about 2 years, Kerrigan had played in the high school band. He played the snare drum, so he could read syncopation, okay? And Briggs had had a few piano lessons. I didn't pick up the bass until I was 15, and some kids in my school forced that. They said, we're putting together a band to do Elvis with Scotty and Bill, and your father has an acoustic bass. My father once played the bass. And so they hand me this acoustic bass. That's a bad instrument to start on, I gotta tell you. But I got that together. But Ray was right. He said you guys play the contemporary music better than the older Nashville guys. That was the point of it. And so when he thought our sight reading was good enough, he'd do that. You know.
Yeah, I'd like to say that the system we use in Nashville was started by the Jordanaires. Neil Matthews, who was their music leader, I saw this on his music stand in 1959.
And all it is, you know, we have A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then octave A, B, C, D, E, F, G. All it is we're putting a number instead of a letter, okay? And when we write it out in numbers, now we had to recognize the chords. But when we wrote it all out, we'd say, Elvis, what key are you doing it in? And he'd say, I don't know, what was that key? And Briggs would give him a key. He'd say, raise it. He'd raise it half. Raise it somewhere, raise it again. David would say, well, it looks like it's G. Well, if you wrote G on top of your numbers, all you got to do is apply the G scale to all the numbers, and you have a chart.
Instead of saying do, re, mi, we say 1, 2, 3.
Just like the song.
Yeah.
So if we could, you know, like I said, one of the few songs, and by the way, these are the 40 songs that you guys did between June 4th and June 9th of 1970. I don't know if you can all read that, but that is a lot of songs. That's a lot more than you normally would have done in 5 days, if I'm not mistaken. And you know, some of my favorites, but you know, like I said, one of the ones that really crossed over with the live set that he did, which we all get to see, and that's the way it is You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, which to me is like the Ronnie Tutt song. Okay, so that brings us to the bridge over troubled water. So take us back to that late night session and tell me about what happened after all the record stores were closed.
Well, this is when he sprung on us. If I remember correctly, you stop me, Charlie, if I get this wrong. But he looked over at the band and said, have you guys heard this Simon and Garfunkel record, Bridge Over Troubled Water? And I heard it on the radio driving in a couple of times, you know, and Briggs said, I remember David said something about, could we get the record? Because Larry Knechtel was a California guy who did the piano part, and he later became a dear friend of mine. And he said that Paul Simon came out to LA with Artie Garfunkel, and it's just him at the piano, and I'll tell this quickly. And he said, could you make this sort of like a gospel piano thing to Larry Knechtel? And Larry Knechtel just killed it, okay? He was this is a guy who played on Beach Boys records. He was one of the top keyboard players in the world. It was the only time the Grammys gave a sideman a Grammy for the performance, okay? And so David said, it's a great part, and I really need to hear the record to do it. And in typical Elvis fashion, he said, David, just play something. And David played something that was sort of like it. Okay? And Elvis, Elvis had said this. He said, I'd really like to show Garfunkel how to sing this. Because Artie was way up there in the stratosphere, remember? And Elvis wanted to get down here with it. And I think that was the reason he did it. And I think it was one of his greatest vocals at the end of it.
Absolutely, and it fits in with, you know, a lot of the material that he was doing, If I Can Dream and Walk a Mile in My Shoes, these sort of inspirational, not gospel, but like inspirational songs about life and, you know, how to be and everything. And I wondered, Norbert, if you might show us how you did what you did on that night so long ago.
Well, I have to tell you, that was 55 years ago. And I've got a little arthritis in my joints. I might be able to do a minute and a half of it, okay? Now you'll notice when I drop the bass and it bangs on the floor, that my hand just went like that, okay? We'll see. Would you pray for me if you feel like it, okay? I'm a little, you know, I had my 83rd birthday the other day. Okay. That's my first excuse. I'll come up with another excuse to use. Oh God, okay, well, here we go.
And in the meantime, Charlie, if I'm not mistaken, you played on the record, Bridge Over Troubled Water. Not that song, but on the record. Do you remember when you did that on the Boxer?
Yeah, I got a call from Paul Simon's office, and they said, do you own a bass harmonica? And you know, in Nashville, we're taught to say yes and figure it out. And in my mind, I said, not yet. But I said, yes. So I called the harmonica company, and they sent me one. Folks, it's a whole lot different than this little thing, I'll tell you. Anyway, we got to the session and we did the song, The Boxer. And I must say, Paul Simon dictated every note that I played on that record, and he was right. He was a genius. If you think of the hit records that he was involved in, they're all different. Most artists have a style, you know, but Paul Simon did so many things like Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard and this Bridge Over Troubled Waters and The Boxer. They're all different kind of things. The guy was a genius. Graceland, remember the song called Graceland? That's where we're all going. That's where we all are right now. So, so Norbert, if you wouldn't mind taking us all the way back 55 years ago into this room right here with you guys playing, and I'm going to play the version that you guys did and show us how you did what you did.
I'm going to play along with myself. That was the real me when I was 28 years old. Okay.
Thank you everyone so much for coming today. We really appreciate it. We will see you around. I won't stop smiling for a week.